Today's guest is Zakk Garner, a multi-instrumentalist out of Nashville. Zakk's talented playing has established him as one of the go-to musicians in the Nashville scene. Welcome, Zakk. How's it going, man?
It's going well, man. How about you? Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, great to have you here. It's going great for me too. So let's start you back to the beginning. Where were you born and raised, and how did music first come into your life?
Cool. Throwing it way back. I'm from Tickfaw, Louisiana, which is about an hour north of New Orleans, out in Tangipahoa Parish. It's the sticks, country. My parents were both in love with music. My mom's an audiophile, always loved listening and going to shows, but doesn't play anything. And my dad was a guitarist, so music was always in my household. So I was exposed to it very early from my dad playing and him having gigs, always having friends over and playing. But I didn't really start until I was about 13, getting interested in the music. I actually pushed it away because it was all my parents were into. So I was like, no, I want y'all to hang out with me. Let's play video games. Let's go do something. So I got the bug at about 13, and I started trying to play a little guitar. And my dad was my first teacher, so that was really special.
Oh, wow. That's so cool. Who are some of the artists you're listening to growing up or that you had around you?
Oh, man. I'm so thankful for what I grew up with, because everything from like 80s new wave, Stevie Ray Vaughan to Pantera, Zakk Wylde, Black Label Society, Ozzy Osbourne, like B.B. King. It's such a wide variety because I'm fortunate my parents had great taste in music. So I think the most common theme for everything was kind of rootsy, some type of American type of music, whether it be blues or jam band, kind of country, rock, pop. So everything, I think my biggest influences were coming from my dad, liking like Southern guitar players, like Allman Brothers, Steve Ray Vaughan, B.B. King. And I was actually named after Zakk Wylde, who was Ozzy Osbourne's guitarist, and now it's Black Label Society. So that was one of my biggest, and still is one of my biggest guitar heroes.
Yeah, that's awesome. So are those the people you were playing guitar when you first started playing instruments?
Oh yeah, trying to. I remember trying to play along. I bought a Zakk Wylde, like Ozzy Osbourne DVD. It was like live at Budokan, and it's this huge arena. And I learned some of the songs. I was trying to play it along with it. And I was standing up in my room. I'd probably been playing for maybe a year. I was so bad. I mean, I was bad for a long time. And I was trying to play with the DVD, and my strap fell. Like my guitar fell off my strap. And I was just like, oh, but I quit. It sucks. It was so bad. But it's just funny, man. Those beginnings keep you humble. Looking back once you get further down the road, being like, man, I'm glad I didn't quit. Or it's like those heroes that inspire you to play a certain way. It's just awesome to have the guidance, to be able to go, yeah, I want to be able to play like Zakk Wylde, or I want to play like Carlos Santana or whatever it is, and look up to them and try and match that sound.
Yeah.
And we're so fortunate now, man, being in like 2021 with all the technology we have, aside from Zoom not working from time to time, you can like dial up anything on YouTube, be like, all right, I want to look at a Stevie Ray Vaughan recording, and then slow it down to like 15% and copy exactly what the lick is.
Yeah, that's totally true. And that's a great point, is that, technology's made learning these instruments so much more accessible. It's just an awesome thing. When did you start picking up other instruments? I know you play more than just guitar. When did you start moving on from that?
Yeah, man. So guitar was my first instrument. I started when I was like 13. And then whenever I went to high school, I wanted to play football and be in band, and I wanted to play guitar, but I couldn't do both. And I also couldn't play guitar in band. So my band director was like, I'm not going to let you play guitar. And that was Weatherly. I love that woman. She was a great mentor to me out in Hammond, Louisiana. She wouldn't let me play guitar in band as much as I fought it. So my mom got me a saxophone from the pawn shop, like a little $250 Bundy tube, real crappy little saxophone, but it got me far, man. I put a lot of time into that. So saxophone, I started my freshman year of high school. So I got kind of a late bloomer, like 13, 15. And then I picked up piano a sophomore year of high school. I've been playing that since. And then started to just add on a little bit along the way. I started taking bass a little more seriously after I took like a bass gig a few years after I'm playing guitar. I'm like, oh no, it's not just like, oh, if you play guitar, you can play bass. No, that doesn't make a good bass player, So I learned that pretty early, thankfully.
Yeah, That's so cool. What drove you to pick up all these instruments? Like, what's the driving force behind your desire to play music like that?
I don't really know. That's a great question, man. I haven't thought about it too much. I've always just been enamored by so many different genres of music, and there's so much beauty in the diverseness of everything, and how diverse everything is, from like a Chopin polonaise up to like Sierra Hull playing mandolin, or I don't, it's so all over there, like a John Coltrane tenor solo. Like it's everything is so incredible, and I wanted to. I feel like it all influences each other in a certain way. Like if you had the big picture of music, or like music being a puzzle, if you have the like a big puzzle, every time you learn like a new song or pick up a new instrument, you get like another piece or another corner of it. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. So you started playing all the instruments. Did you have a lot of performing experience during that, those young years of being a musician? I know you played some in high school, it sounds like. Did you play outside of that at all?
Yeah, I started gigging like right as soon as I got into high school. I started a band with a couple friends like from the like regional area, and we were pretty good, man. We did like a couple battle of the bands. It was all original instrumental music, so no vocals or anything. So I was very interested in composing right out of the gate. You know, just like oh, I want to write nice melodies that are singable and have improvisation be the biggest theme. So that was always what drew me to music. Is I loved to be able to play, and I wanted to like impress my dad or have him proud of me because he played guitar, you know. But I always thought the ability to improvise is one of the most incredible things about music. Just as we speak, I want to be able to speak through my instrument, and I don't really sing. I either say like you either got to pay me a whole lot to sing because I'm gonna have to practice a whole lot, or just you don't want me doing that. But I want to be able to sing through my instrument, and improvise. So that's what I want to be able to express myself. So like take a listener to feeling what I'm feeling, or make them feel a certain way by the way that I play or what I play and how I say it through the instrument. So doubling back, that's another thing that got me through the various instruments. They're so expressive in different ways. Like you can't bend the string on the piano, but if I wanted to bend something, I'd go to the guitar. And can't do that on piano. Synth, different story.
Yeah, that's so true. And it sounds like, the way you're talking about improvisation, that from the outside, I'm not super experienced down there, but that sounds like a very New Orleans thing. What kind of influence did New Orleans in that area have on your sound growing up?
Oh, I feel like I took that for granted until I left Louisiana. Like I didn't realize how culturally rich the music was and the influence I was getting just from being in Louisiana. Even though I grew up in the country in Tickfall, like the people know we call it swamp pop. And I'm not even living in the swamp or anything. I'm like, I got like cows in the backyard. You know what I mean? It's like country. But swamp pop being like Zydeco-ish Cajun music where it's like you got a rhythm section, you got drums, piano, guitar, you got a singer. Generally, you have a couple horns, or like at least a tenor sax player. So it's like I was introduced to having horns in music very early, or like fiddle, and they would all have a different role. Then so you got that realm, and then in New Orleans you got the brass band and jazz and swing and the street beat and all these other things that I was fortunate to have just kind of in my head, not even thinking anything of it. So I think that's like why people they're kind of enamored by New Orleans music. It's like oh that's how it's supposed to sound. So I'm fortunate in that regard, and didn't really start going back and studying it more in depth till later.
Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, at what point did you said you moved, before we talked, you mentioned you moved from New Orleans to Nashville. What took you to New Orleans first? Like, was it music that drove you there and gigs and stuff like that? Or what was your experience in Louisiana happening? Like after
Yeah,
high school?
so I took the music education route. I knew that I wanted to do music very early, and I wanted to be a player. But I also have a huge passion for teaching, and I love to teach, man. So I went to Southeastern Louisiana University, which is in Hammond, Louisiana, like 10, 15 minutes away from where I grew up. So it was real convenient. So for my undergraduate degree, I went there and I was going to study classical saxophone and guitar. So I started as a double major, and I couldn't do both. It was too much. So I just stuck with the saxophone thing and started gigging on guitar in the area. So I started doing both, and it started getting out into more regional areas of playing. So it just led me to New Orleans naturally, where all the music, it's such a hub for soul music, blues, jazz, brass band, like all kinds of different things. It's just in Louisiana, you think you want to be in New Orleans, it's the cultural spot for sure.
Yeah. What's more of the music scene like in New Orleans? Like, are there places for rock and all that stuff too, or is it more jazz oriented? What's that like for playing?
Yeah, I would say it's a ton of funk, brass band. There's original music in that realm. It's not like a singer-songwriter city or an industry city. Whereas like Nashville, you think of Nashville, you think of singer-songwriters, music industry, session work, and all that. So that scene is very different from New Orleans. New Orleans would be like, all right, you can have 3 gigs in one night, start in the morning on Frenchman Street, play it, Basso, go down to Spotted Cat and the Apple Barrel, and all be playing either tread, like traditional jazz, so like a Sidney Bechet type of vibe, or going all the way to modern jazz. I had the fortune of playing with Jason Weaver, who's a very incredibly gifted composer and bassist in New Orleans, who was writing super competitive music, and that was very challenging. But it was modern swing, like in the spirit of all those that have come before him in that tradition. So that was neat. You have that very modern jazz, but you also have the traditional thing too. So it's like there's so many different styles and incredible layers to it. The detail is they say the devil's in the detail. That's such a cool part of being in New Orleans, because you have everything like just scratching the surface for cats doing it to busk and make a little money, all the way to cats that are like some of the finest musicians and scholars in the world in their respective music.
That's amazing. Yeah, it seems like such a unique scene. So yeah, let's continue your story. So you went to New Orleans. What happened then?
Well, okay, so I was like commuting back and forth between during my undergrad, doing like some gigs in New Orleans, while I was studying and getting like my legit degree in music education. So while I was doing that, I fell in love with improvising even more, and I was like, I want to learn how to play jazz and like be able to get around on the horn even better. I was taking saxophone a little bit more seriously than guitar at the time, so I started looking into graduate schools. I wanted to get my master's in jazz studies. So actually, Victor Goins, who is New Orleans native, he plays in the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra with Wynton Marsalis. I ended up auditioning for Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. So there was a huge New Orleans link up with that and why I went there. He's one of the top I guess interpreters of clarinet, coming from like the history of clarinet music. He plays clarinet and saxophone. So he's very deep in the New Orleans tradition. So I went and studied with him and got my master's in jazz studies in Evanston, Illinois at Northwestern. So I was there for 2.5 years, I believe, up there doing my master's in the Chicago music scene. Which was great. And I learned a lot about life being up there. That was my first time actually leaving Louisiana. So every time you move to a different city, it's kind of like starting over. And so you don't have those comforts of home. So it forces you to grow. And the thing is, like, you don't want to be complacent. In New Orleans, at my ability at that time, I was a solid player, but I was still kind of sad in certain ways. But leaving that city, I got complacent. So I'm like, I need to have a fresh start, be away from my family. I have a tough time, it makes you grow and it forces you to want it, to be hungry. So I did that in Chicago, and then I was looking for teaching jobs once I finished. This was 2016 when I finished my master's degree. My talented music teacher in high school was retiring, and he reached out. He's like, "Hey, I know whenever I was teaching you, you had joked about taking my job when I retired." And I was like, man, I'll take a job right now. So he's retired. So I ended up moving back to Louisiana, and I took a talented music job where I was at for 3 years, man, teaching gifted and talented music in public schools in Tangipahoa Parish, which is the parish that I grew up in. So it was really neat to have like that full circle thing where it's like studied, traveled, worked really hard to get my playing and my education together, and then give it back immediately, where I grew up. So that was really close to my heart to do that. So when I got home and doing that, that's when I started digging more into the New Orleans scene. So I commuted back and forth, playing gigs and teaching. So it was like an hour drive both ways every day. Between I would teach from like 7 to 4, then drive to New Orleans to play a gig, or match class, whatever it is. really burning the candle at both ends, trying to maximize my time and where I was at.
Yeah, that's awesome. What kind of gigs were you playing at that time? Were they all jazz gigs, or what was the kind of music you were, getting hired for?
Mainly so, man. I was very fortunate because my mentor's mentor was Ellis Marsalis, who was like the patriarch of the Marsalis family, some of the biggest jazz musicians on the planet. Wynn Marsalis, Branford, Jason. So in that area, I was very fortunate to meet Ellis Marsalis while I was doing my studies. So when I first moved back to Louisiana, my first gig within 2 weeks of me coming back was with the Ellis Marsalis Quintet at Snug Harbor. The trumpet player, Ashton Parker, didn't show up that night, and I just showed up in a suit, like, hey, I'm ready to sit in. And he's like, oh, man, he's like, I remember you, you're back home. He's like, put him on the gig. And I was like, oh, my God. I was like, it just moved home. It's like one of the coolest gigs you can get in town and one of the best paying ones, too. So that put me in a great position back in the community where it, like, catapulted me into being like, oh, yeah, he's a good player, and he's here now, So I was just coming back from Chicago, even though I grew up in Louisiana. If you're not on the scene, people don't know to call you, if you're not out there working.
Absolutely.
So I got really lucky to come back and be thrown into that position,
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was doing mainly jazz and improvised music, backing up singers, being a horn player, or doing brass band stuff. And I also, in those few years, I recorded my first album of like instrumental jazz influenced Black American music, swing. So that was really cool. So I was booking my own duo, trio, and quartet during the time as well.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, it's such a cool story, and it seems like you have such a cool background with all this. So eventually you moved to Nashville. How did that go about, and what took you to Nashville?
Man, so Nashville was never on my radar at all. I'd always thought being a session musician would be cool, or a studio musician. That would, when I was like 13, 14, just getting to playing, I would get like Musician's Friend magazine and Woodwind and Brasswind and all that, looking through. I remember thinking like all these players like have signature guitars and do all the studio work. Like, man, that'd be the perfect thing. You know what I mean? Just go in and meet all these dope, amazing artists and then help their music come to life. So I hadn't thought about it since I was like 15. Long story short, I ended up started dating who was my wife now, Catherine Rosewood. She was a singer-songwriter and artist in New Orleans at the time, and started doing our thing, and things got serious. And her dream was to move to Nashville and do the singer-songwriter thing. So I'm like, hey, I love you. We're together now. I guess we could do this. I'd uproot, and so it got to the point where we'd planned to move like the summer of 2020, or no, summer of 2019 or 2020. And it's so serendipitous the way that it worked out. I was playing a jazz brunch at Pythian Market, which it was a really cool gig, and I'd always get awesome players on that. I was really spoiled. But I'd always play saxophone with my trio there. So it was just drums, upright bass, and saxophone. And this one day, it's like a Saturday morning, I took my guitar as well. So I was playing tunes, switching between guitar and saxophone, leading the group. And then I played a tune on upright bass too. And it turns out Ron Pope was in town that day with his wife for a wedding, and he was checking it out the whole time. And so I get an email like later that evening. I'm already on my way to the second gig of the day. Like I played my jazz brunch, I'm on to a wedding. Like I was playing bass at that wedding. So I showed up and I get an email. It's like, hey Zakk, Ron Pope here. I was at your trio gig this morning, and I'm looking for multi-instrumentalists for my North American tour. He's like, coming up in 2020. I'm based out of Nashville. I saw you're a teacher, all this stuff. He's like, would you ever consider moving here, or what would it take to get you to go on this tour? And I was like, oh, what? So it's based out of Nashville, so it was incredibly serendipitous with the way that it worked out. It literally physically opened the door for us to take that leap,
Yeah, that's amazing. So has it been a transition for you to go from, a jazz-centered city like New Orleans to a singer-songwriter place like Nashville? Like, is there a jazz scene in Nashville at all, or have you kind of just had to make that switch?
There is a small scene here. I haven't been much of a part of it yet, especially since coming out of COVID and the pandemic and all that. But this is the least saxophone that I've played in my last 10 years of my life, since I started playing saxophone, I think. So it's the least saxophone I play and least jazz that I've played. So it has been a big transition, but it's things that I've done before, and skills and abilities that are very much within my bag that I happen to love too. You know, I picked up mandolin in 2020 as well to double on tour with Ron. So on that tour, I played keys, mandolin. I played saxophone mainly, but also played keys, slide guitar, mandolin as well. You know, so I wanted to have all this utility stuff that just happened to work out to have in my bag. It's like, man, if I can have all these different instruments, I can work more. You know, and I can teach them, perform them, solo, accompany, whatever it needs to be. You know, as long as I'm doing music and playing music, I'm fortunate, and I love it. And I want to make sure that whoever I'm around, if I'm playing for, they're having a good time listening. If I'm teaching, they're getting the most that they can. You know, if we're just hanging out, I want to exude that musicality and who I am.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so cool how you set yourself up to, have success in so many different ways because of how multi-talented you are. I'm sure it's a huge thing. What were your expectations like before you moved to Nashville? And how did actually being in Nashville compare to those initial expectations?
Oh man, I think it exceeded my expectations immediately because I was fortunate to come here with a gig. You know, a lot of people, I think they drop everything and just take a shot in the dark and they're here and they're like, all right, I need work. So I guess it was smart, but also very fortunate in the way that I moved here around that touring gig with Ron. And he connected me with that band. There were so many incredible players on that tour. Through on the road for a month, on the road for a month with these outstanding players that are very tied to the Nashville community, that are wonderful people too. And so I was just so lucky to be thrown into that position. And one thing leads to another, as it does in every community. It's like, hey, if you bring your A game, you're a great player, but even an even better person and better hang, you're going to be okay, you know? So Ron connected me with a producer named Scattered Brains, who is Struggle Jennings' producer. And Struggle is Waylon Jennings' grandson. So it's like country royalty, you know, it's in that lineage. So I went and did a session. This was like once COVID had already started happening, pandemic and all that. I did a session at Scat's house, and the chemistry was incredible, man. Like he's like, all right, I need some like spaghetti western twang on this hip hop track. It's just like wild combinations of stuff, and it went so well. Fast forward now, it's like I'm a salaried musician on Struggle's label, which is called Angels and Outlaws. So that it's the way that it snowballed and moved very quickly for me. I feel fortunate. It was hard for a while because there was no work for anybody. You know, people that had been here for their entire lives with pandemic and COVID lost so much work because couldn't play, you know, or couldn't go on the road. So I was doing the Zoom lessons for a while, you know, teaching various lessons and various instruments and skill levels and all that on Zoom, which again I think I prepared myself for by learning all these instruments, you know. So I feel like I'm just very fortunate, man, because I haven't had a common experience compared to a lot of people at all. So I try to just make sure that I'm thankful for where the road has taken me and where I'm going, and try to always be very present in that and give it back.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. I mean, of course, it seems like you have had great fortune, but it's also well deserved because you've worked your way to there and you've practiced so hard to have so many different opportunities that you can take advantage of. So that's definitely super commendable. What are you working on now, and what are you excited for that's coming up?
Oh man, I love that. So a lot of the work that I'm doing right now has been session work for the Angels and Outlaws label. So there are several artists on that label. Brianna Harness, who's Struggle's daughter, we put out her debut album last October, Welcome to My Nightmare. So I was excited about that. Caitlin Curtis, an incredible voice, she's actually coming over. It's like 20 minutes to rehearse and work on some stuff. Played on her debut record as well, and I wrote on some of that as well as recorded a lot of the instruments. And then Struggle's newest record, his first solo record in 2 years, just dropped. It's called Troubadour of Troubled Souls. And I have a track on there where I play guitar, and it's Struggle and Yellow Wolf. And so that was really cool to be able to play on the tune with Yellow Wolf, because I grew up in Tickfaw, Louisiana. It's the country. So if you think of the whole American type of we love rap, we love country, we love blues and rock and all that. He kind of like coined that. So it was neat coming from that country type of element to be able to play on a record with him. You know, that's probably one of the coolest things I've done so far. And it's all thankful to struggle for linking it up, you know. But we're going on the road in 2 weeks. So we're going on a huge tour, like a 24, 26 day tour going up from Nashville, like the north east. So it'll be sweet, man. I'm looking forward to that. As far as original music, the majority of what I've been doing lately has been working on these other people's records and like contributing my writing. Or like, hey, what about this hook? Or it's like, oh, if we're just in G, you know, how about we add some different character? If we just have like a chord, like a G chord, why don't we change it to like a major 7 or give it some, add some identity to it, you know? So that's like the biggest thing that I like to contribute in that way, because that's my artistry coming out into their music. So I haven't put out any original music since my last record, but it's starting to build up in me. So I'm excited to write and compose some stuff for myself pretty soon.
Yeah, that's so exciting. And it seems like you've got a great thing going. And, you know, like you said, sometimes it just takes, it takes time for things to happen. And it seems like you're getting your foundation set up in Nashville for a lot of great things to happen going forward. And I'm so excited to hear it. I think you have, great talent and definitely a bright future ahead for you. What advice would you give to artists who might just be starting out and getting the ball rolling, or instrumentalists who just are picking up a guitar? What would you say to them as they begin their journey, I guess?
Oh man. First thing I would say, I feel like when it comes to advice, there's so much you can say, but you gotta love it. You know, if you don't love it, it's not gonna work out in any way that you want it to work out. You know, it's more about, I feel like with social media and how prevalent it is in like societal ways now, especially for young players, it's like, oh, you can play faster than me, or you can play better than me, or his tone is better. Like that is endless, you know. So I guess I would say don't look at it about the race. It's not a race at all, but look at it as being a journey. And as long as every day you're better than you were yesterday, then you're doing, you know. So do it for you and make sure that you love it and that you love the journey. If you do it for someone else, you're just gonna be bitter. You know, along the way, you're gonna and you can't have that. You gotta really love it. So I'd say find artists that you love and get as close as you can to the spirit of their music as possible. You know, if it's like Ed Sheeran, try and match everything. Like try and sing his songs with the tempo and then like the style that he's singing them, but even to the strums of the guitar, lock that in. That way you get that in your bag. And I'm not saying like cop this whole thing and try and be a clone, but get that and move on. You know, that way you have that in your bag and you're assimilating these tools to bring to every other experience that you have. So I'd say have big ears, be passionate about it, have thick skin. You know, because it's hard out here. It's tough, man. There's so many people doing it now, and everybody's good in their certain way. There's always going to be someone better. So I think have thick skin, be passionate,